Hello and welcome to Paul Taylor Glass Lessons. Today I'm going to show you how I make my basic coil pot rigs. I'm going to show you how I make a basic 10mm rig, all from Color Rod's coil pot. I'm going to do one color. I'm making this out of solid Blue Dream. So I'll show you what materials and tools we'll need, and then I'll get started. This video, I'm not sure how long it's going to take, so it may get broken down into two parts. We'll see. I'm going to try to make a pretty basic rig, but it's going to be a 10mm fixed joint, solid color coil pot rig. So let me show you the colors, materials, and tools, and let me get the camera all situated for you. It's a hot day in the shop here, I'll tell you, but not complaining. All right, camera's looking good right there. Let me put the handy dandy lens on. And I want to say real quick, I know a lot of people have been asking about about a rig lesson, and my main thing is just I'm trying to fit it into a short amount of time, just so it's watchable. Because most of the rigs I make take anywhere from 3 to 12 hours to make. So I'm going to try to bang one out in about an hour or so. It may get broken into 2 lessons. Maybe I can do it in one, or not 2 lessons. I'm sorry, 2 videos. But either way, they'll be posted back to back if that's the case. So like I said, making this out of Blue Dream. I have here a pound. I'm not gonna use the whole pound, maybe a little under a half pound. And then I've got 2 12mm heavy wall tubes, both as handles. One I'm gonna build the rig off of, and the other I'm gonna build I'm gonna pull the down tube and joint off of. And as far as tools, pretty much basic stuff. We're gonna need our tweezers, we're gonna need our reamers, and you know, it's always good to have a pick or sculpting tool if you gotta open up a hole or do a little bit of shaping. And we also, let me grab, I'm gonna use a couple 7mm clear rods as handles. But other than that, just the one color and the tubes, and that's it. So let me get the torch fired up here and let's get started. I like to start from the top down. So I'm going to coil pot, just one rod on the end of a 12mm tube, and then I'm going to puff that out, make sure that it's all melted and smooth, and then pull it into approximately a 12mm tube of the Blue Dream. So I'm going to start by just flaring out the end of this clear 12mm tube, just so I have a nice little flare to coil off of. Just going to heat it up, and with my reamer, gently taper it out a little bit. See right there, it's not that drastic of a taper. So now I'm going to turn up to a large flame, and I'm just going to coil pot up this one rod, just into a medium-sized bubble. And while doing a coil pot, you want to focus your heat right on where the color meets your coil that you're building up, and only heat the rod. Notice that I'm keeping the coiled up section out of the flame and just only heating the rod and focusing the heat on right where it touches the coil that it's adding to. And I'm not doing like a wrapping motion with both hands. Both hands stay in the same position. And I'm just heating the rod and coiling it up, just building up a nice hollow bubble. And we're going to use this technique to make the entire rig. So we're just starting with the mouthpiece, just coiling up one rod and going to get it nice and even, and then I'll pull it down into approximately 12mm. And once I get the rod about 75% coiled, I'll start focusing on kind of coiling it inward to close up the bubble. We're almost there. I'm just tapering it in and just coiling up, closing up the bubble. A few more seconds, it'll be closed up, and I can start applying heat to the entire thing and just melting all those lines in and melting it smooth. All right, so you can see we've got a nice bubble built up from that one rod of Blue Dream. I'm now going to heat the entire thing, get it nice and hot, and just gently and occasionally puff a little bit of air into it, just melting those lines in nice and smooth. And I'm focusing my heat on the top half. Once that's melted in, I'll attach a handle and I'll be able to melt in all those lines where it attaches to the tube. If I were to apply a lot of heat to that part right now, it would start flopping around and moving on me. So I want to just get the top half done, let it stiffen up for a second, attach a handle, and then I can work on the other side. Just a few little puffs and then back into heating it. And I'm just going to roll it on my marver. Just kind of taper the sides down. So now we have the top half melted in, but we still have those lines, the coil lines visible on the bottom half. We're going to let this cool off for a few seconds, attach a handle, then we'll focus our heat where it attaches to the tube and do the same thing we just did and get it melted in nice and smooth. So I'm just going to attach a 7mm rod as a handle. Try to keep it as centered as possible, right on the end. And now I'm just going to focus my heat on where the tube attaches to this coil. Just heat it a little, let it condense, let it melt in, and give it a few puffs. And just repeat that a few times. Just want to make it nice and smooth and nice and even. All right, now that we've got our lines melted out and the tube's pretty even, I'm just going to heat the whole thing. And once we have the same temperature roughly through the entire piece, I'm just going to give it a gentle stretch outside the flame. Kind of bring it down to roughly 12 millimeters. And I have left on the end here kind of a bubble where the handle is, and I'm going to use that to kind of puff out into a donut for the neck. But I'm going to take this thin part right up at the top, and I'm going to do a Maria, and that's going to end up being the mouthpiece. So if you watch my carb cap lesson, you'll see how to do a Maria on tube. Essentially the same thing. Just going to let this cool off for a couple seconds, and then focus my heat right on one area. And just press in, making sure gentle pressure and even heat, and it'll start to form up a ridge known as a Maria. Alright, now I'm just going to kind of straighten it out on my graphite pad here. If you don't have a graphite pad built on your marver, you can always go down and do it on just a regular paddle. Just want to straighten out both sides. And now I'm just going to kind of heat this area on the bottom, puff it out, and I'm just going to do a little shaping. This is going to be the neck of the rig. So depending on how you're working on it, you can do some shaping right under the Maria or not. So I'm just kind of evening it out, kind of condensing it. I don't want it to be too long. And in the process, I kind of got it a little crooked, so I'm gonna just heat up the Maria one more time and straighten it out on the graphite. All right, now, excuse me. Now I'm gonna remove the handle right off the bottom here. I'm gonna tear off that little bit of clear. Just grab with the tweezers, tear it off. So you can see I've got a nice Maria here for a mouthpiece. I'm now gonna heat this area and puff it round. I'm just going to apply even heat to that large round section and try to puff it a little wider, a little more squat, and then I'm going to turn that into a donut. And once I've got nice even heat throughout the entire end, I'll give it a few puffs of air, and it may take 2 or 3 returns back to the flame. Go one more. All right, now I'm gonna heat up that bubble and just gently with my graphite pad on top of my paddle. Let me move this a little bit forward here. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Oh. See if I can do it. Like that. So I'm just gonna flatten 2 sides of it. Not too much, but just a little bit. Just make sure the heat is even through the entire bubble. And gently press, and then turn it over the other side and gently press. And now I'll just like to even it out, go back and forth. Make sure it's nice and straight. So now you can see I have a disc on the end of the Maria here. Gonna let this cool off, and I'll pop a little hole in one side, put a gentle push with the bull push, and then I'll pop a hole on the other side, and I'll push the 2 holes together to make the donut. So in a small flame, I'm just gonna pop a hole right in the center of this flattened disc on one side. And now I will use my bull push just to press it in a tiny bit. Not too much, but kind of make enough so I can press the bull push in once it cools and use it as a plug. So you can see I've got a tiny little indent. If you can see it from the side, it doesn't go all the way down, just a little indent. So now I can use that as a plug, hold that in tight, and then pop a hole out on the other side. Now that I have a hole in the other side, I'm going to heat it and press it inward with the bull push, and then I'll return back to the first side and do the same thing and get those 2 holes to touch. I want the rims to touch each other and seal. So I just get the other side hot, give it a push, switch back to the first, give it a push, and just go back and forth, press those together. Kind of switch to a smaller bull push, just because this is a little bit on the smaller side. We're almost there. Yep, gave it a little puff, and there's no air passing through, so it's sealed. So now I'll heat that inside of the hole. And I like to flare it open with tweezers. You can use a reamer, but I'm just comfortable using tweezers because they kind of give a little pressure. You can twist them. And these chromium plated ones don't leave any marks, which is great. And now that I've got it flared a bit, I'm gonna grab my small reamer Heat up the inside. And just give it a little flare. Switching from side to side. All right. Now that we've got a little donut here on the end, I'm gonna take this little short of Blue Dream that I have right here, and I'm gonna just make a little horn coming off each side, just to embellish this a bit before we start working on extending down the bottom of the neck and the can. Figured while we're up here and it's hot, we'll get it done. So I'm just gonna heat up the end of this rod, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of it, and attach a small gather on one side of the donut here. Make sure it's attached evenly, and melt your rod off. And now that I have this gather on the side here, I'm just gonna heat it, make sure that the attachment is all smooth and it's all one piece, and I'll just pull it into a little horn coming up towards the mouthpiece. Now that it's hot, just gonna make sure it's even, take it out of the flame, touch it, give it a gentle pull. Now go back and heat it for a second, and then pull it out and drag it up. And now melt off your stringer that's pulled, smash it off, and clean that point up a bit. Now I'll just use my reamer or my bowl push to straighten it out. And there we have a nice little point coming off one side. Now I'm going to do that on the other side. I think this one I'm going to make a little bit bigger. Not much, just a tiny bit bigger. I'm going to do the same thing, going to heat up a little over 1/2 inch of this color rod and attach a gather on the opposite side of the donut. And I'm just going to make sure it's on center, and I'm going to melt off the rest of the rod here. And now I'm just going to make sure it's melted nice and smooth to the surface. Make sure all sides are connected well and it's all just one solid piece of glass. And then I'll make sure I have even heat through the whole thing. I'll take it out of the flame, just touch it with the rod here, give it a gentle stretch. Not much. And then I'll go in, flash it in the flame for a second, and then stretch it and pull it up. And just let it stay and cool for a second. And tear off your stringer. And then just go in and clean up the tip. Just heat up just the tip, touch it with your rod, and pull it out and melt it. Just tear off that excess glass. Okay, I like that. And I'll just straighten it up and kind of curl it inward with this bowl push. Any graphite tool will work. So now you see we've got a horn coming on each side. I'm now going to heat the bottom of the donut here and pop a small hole, and then we'll coil up a little more coming off that. So I'm heating just the bottom here, just where I want to pop the hole. And once it's hot, I'll keep it in the flame and add some air and puff it out. Now I'll use my small graphite reamer to just flare it open. Go back a couple times, make sure it's wide enough to coil off of. All right, you can see we got a hole popped in the bottom here. I'm now going to use another rod of the Blue Dream. And I'm going to coil off and build the can section of this rig. For cut rods, I like to just tear off the end in the flame because normally a cut rod will end up bubbling when it's heated. So I just tear that little bit off and I'll start coiling up right on the little hole here. I'm just keeping it on the outside rim, making sure it's just getting a little bit wider tapered. And I'm going to use 2 rods to build up this can. Maybe 2.5, we'll see how it looks. So I'm just keeping my hands in the same position, just spinning the rod and spinning the tube and making sure the flame is focused right just on the rod and right near where it connects to your coil. Now that I have it tapered as wide as I'd like, I'm now kind of turning inward and coiling it right on the top of the existing coil, rather than on the outer rim. And once it gets too short to continue coiling, I will tear off the color rod and grab another. And I'll save the short here because that'll be great for attachments, accents. Just set that aside, grab another rod. And again, I'm gonna just tear off the tip of this color rod, just gonna get it a little bit hot, and just tear it off in the flame. And now I'm just gonna continue coiling where I left off. And I'm going to use the rest of this rod, and once I get closer towards the end, I'll start to close it down. And one thing to keep in mind is these coils that I'm building up, it's not a permanent connection, and it's full of little, I guess, imperfections, as you know, all those single lines there that are between each band are prone to cracking. So it's not uncommon for, you know, it's kind of expected. Once I finish coiling this and attach a handle on the end and start heating the whole thing, it's gonna go tink, tink, crack, crack, but those will melt out within a few seconds. So do not worry. If you're doing something like this and you're doing a large multiple rod coil, don't fret if it starts to crack, because you'll be able to melt it in nice. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep focusing the heat on the entire thing. And once you start applying heat to an area and it starts to crack, the last thing, like, some people have the urge to pull it out of the flame and stop heating it. And all that does is just make it crack even more. Once it starts, you just commit to it. Just keep heating it, and it'll be melted and fine. Don't be afraid once it starts cracking. Don't pull it out of the flame and, you know, think it's gonna stop it. All you're doing is shocking it even more. So just continue heating it, and it should be fine. Now that I'm getting towards the end of this rod here, I'm kind of just doing my coil on the inner rim, so the taper starts to close up a little bit. And I'm just closing it up so we have a nice solid bubble here that I can puff out and do some shaping on. We're almost there. All right, now that it's closed, I'm gonna start heating the entire thing. I just heard a little crack. I don't know if you caught it on camera. Tiny crack, then it stopped, and now it's getting melted in. So I'm gonna grab that. Let's see here. I'm gonna grab this 7mm clear rod as a handle. I'm gonna attach it right to the bottom here, and I'm just gonna start melting in all those lines. Just focusing on right here at the top of the can where it meets our donut. And I'm just gonna heat the entire thing, and once it starts to condense a little bit, I'll give it a puff of air, and I'll repeat that process a few times until those lines are all melted out. Just kind of letting it cool off, get on center, and then give it a pop. All right, now I'm gonna remove my handle, and I'm just gonna heat up the bottom half now and just try to get it melted and smooth. So a couple little heats, couple little puffs. Just gonna go back and forth until all those lines are melted out and we have a nice clean looking bubble. And then I'll be able to shape it into a can. I'm gonna grab my paddle here and just gently roll it on it, kind of cool it off a little bit, taper it down, and then I'll go back to heating and puffing it out. But we are almost there. Once I have it nice and smooth and all those lines melted out, I can do a little bit of shaping on it, puff out the bottom, and then we'll flatten the bottom. And it'll be a nice, nice little rig. And then we can pop our hole and then attach our down tube and our joint. Make sure that's all straight. And then see how much time's left on the video, or if it's in part 2, we can add some attachments. And you know, I just said it right there. I'm gonna go and once I get the hole popped in this, once the can and the body are all formed, I'm going to cut the video there and then restart it up for the attachment of the down tube and the joint, and then maybe, you know, then definitely a little horn on the back to accent the horns on the top, and then removing it from the blow tube, and then we'll be ready to rock. See how I thought that all out here while doing it? Really helps me put the time into perspective while I'm actually making it. So right now I'm just heating the bottom and I'm kind of angling it up. I'm giving it a couple puffs, just getting a little wider than the rest. I'm gonna give it one more puff. All right, I really like that shape right here. So I'm gonna let this cool off for a few seconds. And then I'm gonna focus my heat just on the bottom of this bubble, where it starts to taper down and get smaller. I'm gonna focus my heat just on there, and it'll start to collapse and get flat. And once it starts to get flat, try to keep it as flat and centered as possible, and then I'll bring it down on top of my graphite pad here and flatten the bottom. If you go just with a round bubble like this, heat it, flatten it on your pad, it'll end up being thin on the bottom and prone to breaking. So I like to flatten by collapsing in the flame before I go to the paddle and make sure it stands up straight. So now I'm gonna focus my heat for maybe 10-20 seconds just on the bottom here, and it'll just start to flatten on its own. And by doing it like this, it'll become an even thickness and pretty chunky on the base, rather than just going and mashing and flattening it. You're kind of controlling where that glass goes. So there, after just a few seconds, you can see it's kind of flattened on the bottom. It's not straight, so that's why we go in on our paddle. Just gonna press it straight down. I like to give it a little puff. Now I just hold it right there where I like it and let it cool off. I'll give it a couple seconds. And whenever we go down and on a graphite pad or a paddle, it'll cool your glass and leave little marks, little tool marks. So we're gonna go in with a small flame and just flame polish the bottom and make sure any little marks left by the graphite are gone and we have a nice smooth surface. We just wanna go gentle with this. We don't wanna overheat and distort the bottom and have it to where it wobbles or sits funny. We don't want to change the shape of the bottom at all. We just want to flame polish the surface and smooth out any little marks. Right there, I think we're good. Gonna give it a second to cool off, and then I'm gonna place it on the pad here and make sure it doesn't wobble. No, that's good. Now I'm gonna decide where I want the hole to be. And I'm thinking, since I have a large horn here and a small horn here, I'm gonna have it kind of just in front of the small horn and have this large horn kind of come up on the back. So in a small flame, I'm just gonna focus my heat right where I want the hole, and then I'll pop that hole out. All right. Now I'm gonna grab graphite reamer and just give it a gentle flare and make sure it's centered where I like it. And most importantly, I want to flare it to the diameter of my down tube connection. So essentially a little bit wider than your down tube. And once you start making rigs, you'll be comfortable and you'll know what size you want to work with for your attachments. But it's kind of just trial and error at the beginning, to be honest. But I'll show you right here. That's the size hole I'm using, next to a small reamer. Doesn't all the way fit in, kind of 80% up. So yep, I'm gonna put this in the kiln right now. And in the next video, I'm gonna show you how to attach the down tube, get that melted in nice and smooth, pop the hole out there, and then make your 10 mil joint, attach that, make sure it's melted in and nice and clean. Then we'll put a nice horn coming up the back here. And depending on how much time's in the video, maybe we can add more stuff, but we'll see how that goes. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate the support, and hop on to the next video, which you'll see posted just above this one. So thank you, and on to the next.